just walked in and I got Ted here. So Ted, all right. I'm Brandon. So for you don't know me, but I'm covering what we're doing here in PlebLab this entire week. I'm here to cover SatsBuy, the hackathon, and yeah, the startup day on Friday. So Ted, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and yeah, what you do in the Bitcoin space?
Sure. Should I pull the mic up?
Yeah.
Up
Feel
close?
free to make a little love to the mic or whatever,
All
man.
right.
Yeah.
How's this?
Yeah, that's good. You sound great. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm a new plebeian. I've been here for a few weeks.
Okay. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, I do market research. So I'm still mining fiat. I'm way deep in the canary mines.
Hey, me too, man. Low key. So, yeah, I feel that. But all right. So then, what brought you to Austin? Do you have you been here for a while? Kind of what got you interested in Bitcoin? And yeah, we'll start there.
Well, I've been following Bitcoin for a long time.
Okay.
Not long enough, of course, as everyone says.
Yeah, everybody says that, right?
But yeah, I came to Austin really looking for the Bitcoin ecosystem. Where is it? Where is the highest density of people innovating on Bitcoin or on other companies associated with Bitcoin? And I left Boulder, Colorado. That's where I was for a long time. And I went to the West Coast and I've been city hopping. So I went to San Francisco, went to Seattle, went to Vancouver, and the people in Vancouver said, "Hey, you got to go to Austin." So that's what ultimately brought me here.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you know shoot, what is his name? Fissler from Vancouver?
No,
He does
Leo. I knew Leo though.
Okay.
He was running BitDevs up there.
Okay. Yeah. So I know that there's another, I guess more just not bit devs, but just like a Bitcoin meetup that Fissler runs up there. So shout out to Fissler. I've had him on the pod. And then I believe, shoot, the name is escaping me, but there's another person, Alexandra. She helps run BitDevs, correct?
Okay.
Is that in Vancouver?
Yeah, I was only there for a couple of weeks. So
Okay.
I can't tell you.
Okay, so maybe you missed them. Yeah. But yeah. So then you've just been city hopping and then
city hopping, yep.
Yeah. So then what's your end goal? How long are you here in Austin? And what do you want to get out of being here in this Bitcoin Citadel?
These are great questions. You get looped into the most random things here. And that's really what I came here for, right? This is the place where you bump heads with people, you find out new things, you learn. Ultimately, I do want to do a company, a startup, and it may or may not involve Bitcoin. I'm still deciding that. I would love if it did. I want to contribute to the community, but I've done 2 startups before. I did one startup just out of college. That one totally failed.
All right, let's get into that though. All right, so all right, what was the startup? And I guess where do you think things went wrong? And if you were to go back and do it again, what would you change anything? Or yeah, let's go there. I know I just asked you like questions that you could probably go on for like 30 minutes, but go for it.
I'll try to give you the more abbreviated answer to it. But I would say that when I first went into
what was the idea first?
Well, the idea was I want to make a creative problem-solving solution for children.
Okay.
Children, are innately very creative. They're always building, constructing things. But, as you progress in age, you learn, hey, you got to follow the structures that the way things are. And so the idea was, well, can we foster creative problem solving with kids for a longer period of time? And particularly with girls, because, STEM and there's a lot of toys that are directed at boys, but not as many at girls, right? So that was the original idea, STEM for girls. And we did a children's book. Children's book was, honestly, we thought it would be the easiest business model we could do, but it turned out to be probably one of the harder businesses to start. So recruited my best friends on it. We grew the team to about 10 people at one point. We had a lot of revenue throughout the state of Colorado, but never quite got profit figured out. And so, profit's kind of the most important thing that you need to have when you're running a business. So I was burning all the savings I had, eventually made the call to cut all of my personal living expenses, sleeping in a car for about a year straight. And that was, tough period of my life, but it was really enjoyable. And I don't know if I would do it again, but I don't regret any of it because you learn so much. The number one thing I learned is you can't, and this is good for Bitcoin companies too, you can't be purely ideas first. I mean, you can, but the success rate of that is very low, right? It's good if you're a VC or an investor group and you can spread your bets across all of these different people that are experimenting. But if from a personal standpoint, we only have so much time on this planet, right? And failing fast is a tough way to do it. So I learned that lesson the hard way, and that's kind of what I've dedicated my career to since, is really diving into the product market fit and how do you figure out what it is that people actually want.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty interesting that you bring that up because, I think from this past a little bit, I guess, decade-ish, like 2010 to 2020-ish time, we had a lot of growth companies. So I don't know how much you know about me and kind of my platform, but what I do is I bring a lot of, traditional finance and Bitcoin. So I kind of have like both ends of the spectrum. I got two podcasts, Macro Insights and State of Bitcoin. Macro talks to all different kinds of people, just kind of, unrelated to Bitcoin. And then, obviously State of Bitcoin, just the Bitcoin space. And so I get a unique perspective from both sides. I get the traditional finance people, I get the Bitcoin people. And, the traditional finance recently has been just very profitable off of growth companies. And what a lot of those companies, didn't have to care about for a long time was making money. They just were able to get, hey, they have this crazy idea, whatever it is, and we're going to just pour a bunch of venture capital money into it, pour a bunch of money into marketing and other things like that. And then we're going to figure out how to make money and be profitable later, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the Amazon model. But, there's really like only one Amazon, right? I mean,
Right.
majority of the companies they don't show are the ones that fail. And, the one thing that I think is interesting about your story is that it seems like a lot of plebs are kind of in the same wavelength
Yeah,
where
it's true.
they'll go and like do what you did, like live out of a car, do something to just kind of help build on Bitcoin or build something related to that. So then what I guess kind of drew you to this Bitcoin space, and why are you kind of trying to get involved in it now?
Yeah, these are all really good questions. And, I do think that I see this a lot in PlebLab, and that's something I've been trying to talk with people about as much as possible, share the experiences I've had. And, hopefully that helps. I think ultimately, people who are, Bitcoiners are ultimately driven. Obviously, number go up, technology, that's great. And, I think in addition to that, it's helping people, right? And in my mind, there's really a strong link between, a company being successful ultimately in the long term, maybe not in the short term if you have plenty of VC dollars, but in the long term, you have to help people, right? That is the end goal of any business. And I see Bitcoiners as the ground zero of trying to do this in the financial space, implications with all sorts of different sectors. I do think it's sometimes overcomplicated in some settings. I do see some very technology first companies that are out and about, and the hope is that they can link their cool technology invention back to what someone's actually trying to do. From a very practical standpoint. But I've been amazed at some of the business models that I've seen that you wouldn't be aware of unless you're here, kind of meeting people, bumping into them in the hallway. The water cooler talk here is pretty crazy to see.
Yeah, it is. It is insane. It's a unique place to say the very least. I mean, I get like words can't even really describe what's really going on here. You have to come to yourself, come here yourself, I think, to really visit it, because and that's what I'm kind of trying to do now this week is kind of just elevate what all is going on and kind of show like, hey, what's going on here in PlebLab is really special, and the average person that's kind of in here, I wouldn't maybe call them average when it comes to like the average normie, right, or anything like that, but the average just pleb that is just hanging out in PlebLab and kind of building all this stuff. It's inspiring, man. I
It
mean,
really
I don't even
is.
know how else to say it. It's like the Bitcoin space. It just has like you said, like all these people that are just kind of in here, just brilliant and just really have gone down that rabbit hole. And I think it's the passion behind Bitcoin that is just very unique compared to other spaces. But let's get into your second startup.
Okay,
Yeah, let's
sure.
hear about that. So what was that all about? And yeah, let's go through the spiel.
You see, if I didn't learn the lesson the first time, I had to go and do it a second time. So the second startup was very, very different than the first. First was ideas first. It was all college students or recent graduates. So young group. We were knocking on doors. We were selling out, on the pavement at city markets, that sort of thing. And low tech, very low tech, right? Second startup, very high tech. This was an academic spinoff. It had a lot of research grant money, that sort of thing. I linked up with the founder. I was the first employee of this entity. And the prototype was like a bunch of wires, and the pitch deck was all white slides with metrics and crap that investors like don't really want to see, right? They want to see the rigor, but they don't actually care about the intricacies of why the technology works the way it does. So as the first employee, I was really excited by this technology. It was a wearable device that you put behind your ear, and it could detect all the brain signals, the eye motions, and the facial muscles. So if you smiled or winced or whatever, it could see all of that in an EEG readout. So pretty cool tech. The question is like, what do you do with that? So what we did is we created a story. And really, that's how it started, was a story around improving people's sleep. Obviously, sleep is a major problem. If you have sleep apnea or insomnia, or there's plenty of issues. Obesity is certainly one. And we could create a device that could monitor your sleep patterns much better than any sort of wrist watch could ever do. So we took that out into the world, and we raised, I think it was like 1.5 million seeds. So it was like a decent chunk of change from investors.
Yeah, that's pretty tough, dude. So I mean,
yeah,
congratulations on that. Even that, I mean, that's in itself, that's pretty awesome, to say the least.
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, I don't really take a whole lot of credit. All I did was say, hey, all this stuff needs to be cleaned up. Like, you can't have wires everywhere. You need to put it into a nice case. Let's 3D print something. Let's make a slick demo. Let's make the slides look really nice. It's just the basics. Let's make the monetization path make sense. Just kind of startup 101 stuff to make it attractive to investors. Now, the flip side of this is we brought in investors that really believed in the initial market that we were serving. I went out and did over 100 ethnographic deep dive interviews, sitting down with customers, sitting down with different people, all different personas, shapes and sizes of people. And we found that, hey, maybe the sleep thing is not really the best market. Here's an alternative market. And the new market, which is going to sound very different, it was seizures. It was parents of children. Those children were recently diagnosed with seizures. And if you put yourself in that setting, a parent with a kid was just diagnosed, it may take 3 years before their seizures are accurately controlled. So it's like a terrifying experience. They can't hold down a normal job because they're constantly worrying about this. They can't sleep through the night because sleeping when you have a seizure is actually the most dangerous period of time. And so we identified this market, and we're like, okay, the technology we have could totally hit this market. It was like a $300 million opportunity. So in my mind, it was like, okay, well, we have a pretty good shot at taking like a decent chunk of this $300 million market. We're going to help a lot of people who are really, really struggling. I mean, I sat down with these people. Like, one of my interviews was 3 hours long. And, it's kind of heartbreaking to talk to these people who have this severe unmet problem. And, sleep, a lot of people have terrible problems with sleep. I struggle with sleep. It's a very common problem, but it's not quite as severe. The problem is that was a $1 trillion market, and this was a $300 million market. So the investors were like, oh, no, you can't just switch over to a different market. You got to stick with this bigger vision. And that was ultimately why we didn't pivot. And unfortunately, I was not a founder. I was an employee at that company. And at some point I did make the decision to jump ship. And I said, if we're not listening to the customer, then, what are we doing? So since then, I've been doing a lot of consulting work, working with bigger companies. But ultimately, my goal is to start 3, and maybe 3 times is the lucky.
Yeah, third time's the charm, right?
The charm,
yeah. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, because it kind of relates almost to like a little bit about my background. Like, I have a background in like engineering, biomechanics, biomedical engineering, undergrad degree. So all that kind of like, it really resonates with me. And the thing that I was kind of thinking about was like, I utilize motion capture a lot. So, I mean, you think about the green screen kind of stuff, a bunch of cameras everywhere. Well, if you have a device that can like essentially track your motion on your face or anything like that, you can like essentially just plug and play in that with, something like Avatar or one of these movies where, they're using all this CGI, and
Hmm.
instead of, how they do the CGI usually is just a shit ton of cameras where you can use a sensor to do that. Maybe it's be a little bit better and it's like a little bit cleaner for the actors or whatever. But
Yeah.
I mean, there's like that is like, there's like endless possibilities for stuff like that too.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I think the big takeaway for me with all that is that essentially venture capitalists were almost in a sense kind of controlling what the company is doing.
Yeah.
And where I think, like, I've talked to a few VCs in the Bitcoin space, and that's where they kind of, they help guide, they help make connections or whatever. But for the most part, you know, they're helping Bitcoiners or plebs or whatever who really just have an idea and are really inspired by the overall Bitcoin space, but don't really have too much business sense, I guess. So no offense to any of those founders or anything like that, but I mean, I think, like you said, what's unique about you is that you have two startup, kind of experiences, where a lot of plebs that I see that are kind of developing or getting into the space, this is really their first go around. And what comes with that is, a lot of mistakes or potential bumps in the road. And when it comes with something like Bitcoin, where maybe it's volatile in price and that's what affects your overall business, it's a little bit harder to make some of those mistakes. So, with that, I guess, what was your, I guess, biggest takeaway from those two things, that if you were to go in, startup three in
Yeah.
Bitcoin, that you really take away, and this is something that you're going to kind of keep at top of mind at all times?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really breaks down to thinking about the customer from an Austrian praxeological point of view. And for people who haven't heard of, praxeology, it's very simple. It's just you treat people like they have goals. That's the whole premise. And it sounds like such a simple idea, but I think it's a big deal because a lot of the ways that we do customer research is we almost treat people. This sounds terrible, but it's true. We treat people like they're animals or lab rats. We put them in a glass box and we say, oh, if I poke them with this red button or this blue button, which one do they click? I think that's the tendency. And that's really what's described by VCs as the best practice. But if you ask the customer or the person you're trying to help, what are you trying to achieve? And then you take what they're trying to achieve and you just reverse engineer it. You say, what is the first thing that you have to accomplish to get there? What is the second thing? What's the third thing? What are the roadblocks that you have along the way? And then you just reduce those roadblocks. So I like to use the phrase perfection is achieved by removing or minimizing imperfection. And I think that's true from the customer
I
experience.
love that.
Just
I
got to
love
keep
it.
it simple. What exactly are they trying to do? Just make sure you're helping them do that and don't overcomplicate it. Like a lot of people construct this imaginary future world where people will be acting in a certain way. And I think they lose touch of what exactly is the person trying to do. Are they trying to spin up a node? Are they trying to transact with another person? Are they trying to save for the future? And when they are trying to save for the future, what's the first thing they do? No, it's not go on to Kraken and buy Bitcoin and send it to cold storage. The first thing they do is evaluate. Well, first thing they do is determine their savings goal. The second thing is they evaluate their savings options, and in that case, Bitcoin is competing against other savings options, etc. So just breaking it down, I think, is really helpful way of thinking about how you get customers using the thing you're building.
No, I think that that's awesome, right? And I mean, I think that the big portion of that is like putting the customer first, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you mentioned it in your second startup, where it's really just always about the end goal of the customer, right? I mean, if you determine the market and you kind of like limit yourself or kind of focus on the bigger picture, and you don't really minimize it to what is the end goal of the customer, that's where, like, I think you see a lot of things kind of fail. Is like, hey, I see this billion-trillion-dollar market, whatever it is, I want to go capture a portion of that. Well, what problem are you solving for that customer? What are you trying to help the consumer do, and like all those kind of things. And I think that the market will kind of build up upon itself, right? I mean, like, if you look at like a lot of these industries, even outside of Bitcoin, right, like an iPhone, for example, right? I
yeah,
mean, what was there Steve Jobs was even doing, like, I mean, the problem with the original phone was just communication across whatever borders, cities, distances, even neighbors or whatever, instead of having to go knock on their door. And now we have like a mini computer in our pocket at all times. So, I mean, like the evolution of a lot of these things, you can kind of create a market just based on, whatever it is. So, I think, yeah, I mean, putting the consumer first. And I think that's the biggest thing for me with a lot of these Bitcoin companies is I think I mentioned it a little bit on the stream earlier today, but if you can have the end consumer, like the Bitcoiners are a different breed, right? I mean, like they want their privacy. They don't really care if, it's going to help the circular economy. They don't really mind pulling out their phone, opening, maybe it's a Strike or, Moon Wallet or one of these things where you open it and scan a QR code and kind of effectively pay with Bitcoin that way. The end consumer is so used to just taking out their wallet, put in a card, tapping it, inserting the chip, or doing Apple Pay with their phone. Like they don't even care about the background of any of these things. If the way I think Bitcoin and some of these Bitcoin companies can be successful is just essentially allowing users to use whatever service that they're developing and not even realize like kind of what's going on in the back end. And because yeah, like you said, I think if you really just boil it down to what is the end goal, like what problem are you trying to solve from a consumer, or what are they trying to get out of this user experience? If you just boil it down to simplicity, majority of the time they don't really care about what's going on kind of in the background and what, is, being developed, or, if it's Lightning Network or on chain or, whatever it is, they just want cheapest, fastest kind of route. So
Yeah, customers want a lot, and in that example, I think you brought up, it highlights, one of the things that you see a lot, which is, can I make my customer do extra steps to get some benefit? And the way I would approach it is, okay, the customer wants to, let's say it's a transaction app, and they have a set of metrics that they use to judge whether or not they can successfully execute this transaction. And some of those metrics are time related. Like, I want this to be as easy to do as quick as possible, as quick as possible, and minimize the time it takes to determine, who you're going to send it to, or confirm that the transaction is en route, or confirm that the recipient has received the transaction. You want to minimize the time for each of those steps. There's another set of criteria, which is all around likelihood, minimizing the likelihood that something goes terribly wrong. And in that case, those metrics for Bitcoiners might be higher than for normies, right? A normie may want something that is, and I'm just guessing here, we don't know, we have to talk to them, but maybe the normie will say, hey, I want this super fast and easy to use, but the Bitcoiner might say, hey, I want to minimize the likelihood that any third party gains access to my data while I'm typing away on the phone. So the truth is, everyone has both metrics. It's just the priority of those metrics might be different. But
100%.
ultimately, a really good solution needs to solve
Yeah,
for
solve all of them, which is the tough part, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, you're not going to satisfy everybody, but I mean, the way you can satisfy like most people, I think, is probably the most, and also, doing it the right way, right? I mean, like you said, a lot of these companies they look at the bigger picture, like what are the money grab. I think that the one thing that really inspires me about a lot of these Bitcoin companies is, excuse me, is the focus on open sourceness and just kind of being open about what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's going to be like, really valuable when it comes to like going forward, especially, when we've seen things like, recently, like the Twitter files and kind of like other things like that, where, I think that we're getting to a place where maybe normies are waking up a little bit and
Yeah.
understanding, but I don't know. I don't do. What do you think on that perspective? Do you think like the average person is realizing any of that, or do you think it's just maybe in our little I guess, what is it, Bitcoin kind of echo chamber?
Well, we're always in the echo chamber.
Exactly.
So, yeah, but I do. One of the things that I think I've realized over the past few weeks, just meeting lots of different people have come to Austin. We've got South by Southwest going on. I've got my collared shirt on, so you can tell I'm going to some government or some other, got my khaki pants on.
I know,
so,
we got businessman in here.
I think it's good. I think it's important to realize that there's many different people with many different backgrounds, opinions, needs, different priorities, and they all need to become Bitcoiners eventually, right? So the path for one person may be very different from the path of another. One person, let's say they are in, I talked to someone in Ghana recently,
Oh, wow.
and in Ghana they have real transaction problems. Like their banks are subject to arbitrary uh, uh, theft. Really, is what it is. I mean, it's legalized theft
Hmm.
at the government and at the corporation level. They also have real constraints as to what types of currency they can use to buy at the marketplaces that are local.
Hmm.
So, in that context, someone might find one set of needs interesting. And I'll just give a random example here, but in certain countries that are very developing, those people in those countries may have more of a need for lottery like systems. And I think a lot of,
What do you mean lottery-like
well, I mean,
systems?
like, shit
Just,
coins,
oh, okay.
and I'm
Yeah.
not saying that that is a good lottery. I'm saying the appeal of shit coinery is basically a lottery, right?
Oh,
And,
1,000%.
there is a real need. If you have no path out of your economic niche, then some people may decide that, hey, look, I'm not getting out of this problem by saving. The only way I can get out of this problem is through gambling.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I could spend like an hour talking about this subject just alone, but I think, when it comes down to it, we've had a decade long plus of just zero to no interest rates. And when money is cheap, which is essentially like the basement of the fiat system, dumb ideas never die. And I think that that's where I've kind of, found where, like I was describing before, all these growth companies, they didn't really have to make any money. They didn't really have to provide a good service. It was just something that, like, hey, this is kind of a cool idea. Like, we're just going to keep throwing a shit ton of venture capital money towards this. And, eventually, like, we'll figure it out. We'll make some money. But in the end, like I said, some of these dumb ideas don't die. And so when you have companies like FTX, like Celsius, like some of these other shitcoin casinos where they're just like, hey, you know, we're throwing all this money at this company to do all these marketing stuff, and it's like, hey, we have inflation running rampant and all these other factors. Okay, you just deposit whatever shitcoin here, we'll give you 15% or 20% yield on something that, it's like you point at the banks, which are obviously getting bank run right now, but you point at some of those guys and like, hey, they are only offering you 0.5% or 2% or whatever it is. They could be offering you 7%, but not really. Like, the average person isn't looking for the explanation on how that bank is getting 2% or whatever it is. And they're believing this guy or gal or whoever the CEO media face is for XYZ company, XYZ shitcoin casino. And they're trying to find a way out.
Mhm.
I think it's a lesser extent in the United States compared to, Ghana or some of these other unfortunate places, which, have been in, a tough spot to say the very least, right?
Yep.
Third world country, really don't need it. Like, you can't really mince the words around that stuff. And so they get lost in this trap. And then when those things collapse, they potentially lose their life savings, and then they're screwed even more. And it's just this never ending debt cycle, right? I mean, in the United States alone, we have people who are, go to college, go to grad school, go to all these things. Like, you need to be more educated than years before. You need to, be more in debt because you need to be more educated.
Of
And it's
course.
like this never ending cycle. And it's like, all right, well, how am I going to pay off $300,000 worth of student loan debt when I need to live in a city where, like Austin or like Tampa, where I'm currently at, or Nashville, or some of these other places where it's like rent has increased by 50%, or rent's increased by $400 or $500 a month, and I need to live close to where my office is. I could, or I could waste my time and live like an hour away and then have to battle traffic and do that commute and kind of hate my life, all this time. So it's like, I don't know, all these various
A
oh
new
man,
entrance.
yeah. I guess we got somebody ringing the doorbell trying to come into PlebLab. But long story short, we have this kind of never-ending cycle of people who are essentially just trying to get out of it. And like you were saying, I think it's just kind of the FTX and kind of some of these other debacles are just a product of what has been going on, and it's extremely unfortunate. But I think Bitcoin is kind of that where I think if we didn't get enough people that were I guess away from the shitcoin casino and all that kind of stuff, if we got enough people that are kind of I guess more open to Bitcoin and hopefully didn't get burned too bad, that they can kind of find their way into it and maybe hopefully find a way out of this this fiat Ponzi that we're in right now.
Yeah, I do think there's a way out. These people, I'm amazed. Like in my line of work, I do consulting with big Fortune 500 firms and, a lot of banks. I talk to a lot of senior people at big corporations. And I'm always amazed. Like a lot of these guys and girls are very open-minded about Bitcoin if it's articulated in a certain way by certain people, right? So obviously Michael Saylor currently is, he's the leader of the Cyber Hornets or whatever, but his kind of person, right? CEO of a big reputable firm and really not a very exciting firm. It's almost gives him more reputation. That is a really good demonstrator, I think, for other business leaders. Likewise, let's say you're a director of accounting in a firm, right? You probably want to talk to other directors of accounting or people in similar firms, similar place, in which case maybe what you care about most is Bitcoin as a volatility hedge. Maybe that's not the best one, but in today's day and age with Silicon Valley Bank and everything else blowing up, maybe it is a secure place. But each person is going to take their own path. We went to one of the South by Southwest events on Friday, and a bunch of us plebs went down there and we orange pilled 2 people.
Nice.
One guy, he was at Shell, and we just told him fracking, right?
Yeah. Well, hey, Shell is now sponsoring Bitcoin Miami. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, number one vendor.
Yeah.
And I told him this, and he had no idea, right? But he ran a generator, and he had a real issue with throttling up and down his machines to counter demand. And we explained it to him in terminology he understood, and he got it immediately. And he's like, "Whoa, I can own it. How much is a miner? How many miners do I need to run?" It was amazing how fast and to see this.
I think the biggest thing that I've noticed from talking to a lot of people who have orange pilled or a discussion is just like my biggest takeaway from all that is just understanding the person, where they're coming from, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you knew the guy went to Shell, you knew his problem, and you're like, hey, this is how Bitcoin solves your problem. And then once they figures out how it solves his problem, then they'll figure out like, okay, well, what is this whole Bitcoin thing really about, right? Maybe it's mining, maybe it's a Lightning Network, maybe it's like a small business that's trying to eliminate that 3% fee from every time somebody swipes. It really depends. But once you figure out what this person is like really struggling with, that's how you can open the door, man. And that's awesome stuff, right? I mean, we have this big, like I was saying earlier, we have this big tech festival in Austin, South by Southwest, this 2-week period, but no real coverage when it comes to Bitcoin, except for what's going on here in PlebLab, man. So it's overall just exciting stuff. And remind me of your name one more time,
because it's Ted.
Ted. Yeah, because I just came and brought you out here, and
I appreciate the random.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation. Yeah. So Ted, I'm going to be doing this all week. So if you're here, feel free to pop in and out. I'd love to kind of continue the conversation, but sure. I don't know if you're on social media or anything like that, or what you're working on, but feel free to shill what you got going on. And social media, where can people find you? Or are you just going to be kind of out and about and you're one of these quote unquote shadowy super coders that we got in the Bitcoin space?
I'm not a super coder. And maybe I'm a bit shadowy. I don't know. I pulled myself off Twitter about a year ago because I just didn't like the direction it was going. I'm not on Nostr either. You can find me actually on LinkedIn.
Oh, there we go. LinkedIn guy. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. You come in here in I kind of look like khaki pants, and you got the khaki pants, the nice shoes, the button down shirt, and everything like that. But
it's all Goodwill.
Yeah.
But LinkedIn /in/FM Thayer, Thayer.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm happy to connect and talk about Bitcoiners. I try to orange pill the LinkedIn community. It's a hard nut to crack, but it is crackable. Battle. It will happen.
There we go. And so, everybody on LinkedIn, be sure to give him a follow and elevate him on LinkedIn, man. Maybe that's the next avenue. We got Twitter, Nostr, all that kind of stuff. It seems like there's more Bitcoiners like kind of in those platforms, but everybody's kind of hiding on LinkedIn. So maybe diving into the business professional, I guess, kind of space would be next avenue.
Yeah, we're trying.
Yeah.
We're trying.
All right, Ted. Well, I'm gonna kick you out here, and then we'll
Right.
we'll